So welcome everybody to tonight's webinar. We are thrilled that you are joining us. My name is Monica Piñon and I'm part of the team with Unique Advantage. This is the second webinar in our series of ongoing webinars that we have planned, and we hope that you find it full of valuable information. Our next webinar is scheduled for October 17th, so please be sure to follow us in Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, where we'll share more details, and you can also get an invite that way. We will have a Q&A session at the end. Feel free to enter any questions you have through the presentation on the chat box. I have pinned the link to the survey there. So towards the end of the session, we would really appreciate it if you fill that out for us. We would love to hear your feedback and just improve and hear your ideas on topics that you would like for us to cover in the future. Let's get started, and I'll just quickly introduce our presenters for today. The topic we will be discussing is how understanding your why is crucial for achieving financial freedom. And we are very excited to introduce our special guest, Amber Christensen. Amber holds a bachelor's degree in family and human development and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. She completed the executive and professional coaching certification program at the University of Texas, Dallas. She is an expert in human behavior with a passion for helping individuals evaluate their goals and create actionable strategies to achieve them. She is the owner of Be Growable and an executive and professional coach. If you would like to learn more about Amber, you can find her information in LinkedIn. And she will be leading the discussion with Kyle Christensen, who is the owner and founder of Unique Advantage. He is the author of the book Principles-Based Planning, A Better Approach to Financial Planning. He is a principles-based financial planner and a certified financial planner. He's had the privilege of working with hundreds of clients throughout the country in numerous professions and various income and asset levels. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kyle and Amber.
All right. Well, first, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for taking time out of your day, your evening to be with us. And we really want to make this a valuable experience for you and hope that it is helpful to you as you work towards your financial objectives. I'm going to start by talking about the three major purposes of this webinar today. The first is to help you discover your why. Second is to help you gain greater clarity about your why than you had before tonight. And then three, understand the science behind achieving tough long-term objectives. There's a reason that New Year's resolutions usually fail, or people fail at accomplishing their New Year's resolutions. And I think as we go forward, as you hear from Amber, what she's got prepared, I think you'll see a lot of reasons why those usually don't work out. So let's start with what financial freedom means, and then we'll kind of go into some more related to that. So when we're talking about financial freedom, we're not talking about retirement. A lot of times I think people confuse the two or kind of think of them as the same thing. We in Unique Advantage, we don't strive for retirement. Our objective is financial freedom. We define financial freedom by having income, passive income, or mostly passive income from assets that meets or exceeds your required income for your chosen lifestyle. And so, you can kind of, that financial freedom and retirement are not the same thing, because somebody could be retired and not necessarily financially free, or they could be financially free and not necessarily retired. And so those two things don't mean the same thing. Just kind of to give you some idea of where most people are as it relates to the idea of financial freedom or achieving financial freedom. Fidelity actually within the last few weeks released a report basically saying that they've reached a new record of millionaires in 401k accounts. And Fidelity is the number one manager in the country of 401k accounts. Of the accounts that they hold, 2% have achieved millionaire status. So 98% have not. And they were not touting that as a negative. They were saying that was a positive. I think I look at that and I still say, wow, that's not a very high percentage. And I would also add that $1 million doesn't necessarily mean what it used to mean. Another survey from the Retirement Confidence Survey of 2018 from the Employee Benefit Research Institute, they survey thousands of people every year and produce this report. And in that report, they said that 67% of retirees in the United States said that Social Security was a major source of income, which by my, the meaning I take from that is that people are either entirely dependent on Social Security, 67% of that 7%, they're either entirely dependent on Social Security or mostly dependent on Social Security. And if you have any idea of what amount of income that might be, it definitely doesn't scream success on a large scale for most people. The median balance, based on the same report from Fidelity, recent report, said that the median balance for people age 65 and older in the United States in retirement accounts was $88,488. Again, does not really scream success or financial freedom. Those of you who registered early enough, we sent out a brochure that says Your Financial Freedom, and it gives you kind of an exercise to go through. So I just wanted to walk through that really quickly to give better understanding of how we're defining financial freedom and what it's going to take for you to achieve it. So if we look inside that brochure, the first exercise is to start to add up your expenses. So looking at your fixed monthly expenses, what would those be? And you would write that in this area. So that might be annual debt payments, that might be insurance payments, things like that are very regular, and they're typically very close to the same amount each month or each year. Or in the case of like auto insurance, it's every 6 months. So you'll put those fixed monthly expenses in this box. Then the next box, the variable monthly expenses, that could be groceries, that could be utilities going up and down, could be vehicle maintenance or things like that, right? So you'll put your variable expenses in the next box. And then we'll go to discretionary expenses. So that would include things like vacation, entertainment, things like that aren't necessary for your day-to-day living, but you have them, they occasionally happen, or maybe even regularly happen, but they're not part of the regular expenses. And then in the next box, you would put the amount of money you would save each month. For those of you who have met with one of the Unique Advantage principles-based planners, you know that our first principle is to save 15% or more of your income. And that's not something that would change at any point in time in your life. You wouldn't necessarily stop saving money. I think a lot of people think of retirement, for example, as, you save money and you invest until you reach retirement, and then you stop saving and you stop investing. And we're saying that stuff would continue on, that as long as you live, you should be saving some of what you make. Then you add up all of these expenses. Now, what I would say is there's probably people who will listen to this webinar who will say that this is really hard to come up with these numbers, which I think points to maybe one of the next steps that you can take towards financial freedom, which would be to track all of your income and expenses. This kind of information in today's world, with the technology that we have today, should be a lot easier than it has been in the past, right? To be able to know how much you're spending on different things, know how much your income is that's coming in, where it's going. And if you are tracking your income and expenses, you should be able to pull up your tracking app or your spreadsheet and be able to pull these numbers out pretty easily. So the total of all of those expenses or amounts going out would be what we would call your required monthly income. So that's the number that your passive income or your mostly passive income from assets has to meet or exceed in order to become financially free. On the next page, you list out your assets. So your investment assets, retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, real estate, business, or any other kind of alternative investment that you might have. And then the cash flow that you're getting from each of those assets as well. and then you'll add up all of those monthly cash flows and you'll put that here. So you've got your total monthly cash flow, current cash flow from assets, either passive or mostly passive income. And then you put in your required monthly income that we calculated from the previous page. And then we make that, we see what the difference is. And if the required monthly income is higher than your monthly cash flow, then you have a gap. You have a cash flow gap. And that's what you're going to want to try to work towards, shrinking that gap and eventually exceeding that gap. And at that point in time, we would say that you are financially free. You're able to, you can choose to work for money or not work for money at that point in time. All right. So I want to move on this. So that should be helpful. Most of you have probably heard of Simon Sinek at this point. He's an author who wrote the book Start With Why, and he talks about the golden circle. And the golden circle that he talks about has 3 layers to it, and those 3 layers are why, how, and what. And he talks about what's important is the direction, where you start in this golden circle. If you want to succeed in business, or if you want enduring success, or if you want to succeed at any objective that you have, especially any difficult objective, then there's a correct direction that you should go as it relates to the golden circle. Most people, I would say, start in the what. They want to know what investments they should put their money into. They want to know what strategies they should employ and what accounts they should have. And so they start there and they work this direction. So they start with the what's, and then they try to get to the how's. The how's could be the strategies or the principles, right? And then eventually they want to get to the why. Oftentimes, just in my experience over the many years that I've done planning, most people don't have their why very clear. They may not even have gotten there. They're just at the what and the how. And many times they're just in the what, and they struggle as a result. What we're going to talk about tonight is the importance of starting with why, just like Simon Sinek talks about in his book. Why is it so important that we have this very clear in our minds, why we're doing something, especially of this magnitude when we're talking about achieving and becoming financially free? With that said, I thought a perfect person to talk about the challenges that we face and the how our brains can either help us or hinder us, and how can we change our behavior to actually accomplish something this difficult that by far the majority of people are never going to achieve, which is financial freedom. I thought it would be great to bring in Amber, who is absolutely a great resource in this arena. So I want to turn the time over to Amber.
Okay, so for tonight, as I thought about how do you really make long-term goals stick, I wanted to bring in some neuroscience to help us understand how our brain works so that we're working with our brain and not against it. So here's a really interesting video. Hopefully everyone can see it. This is actually a video of neurons connecting. So as you watch these neurons grow and connect and develop, what stands out to you? Kyle, I'll ask you since you're on the line.
Yeah, I think, well, I'll wait till it stops.
You can go ahead.
Okay. Well, I think what's interesting is, when I look at it, I think it looks like satellite images of the Earth at night, and you can see the cities and you can see the traffic and you can see things moving. You can see what looks like the city hubs, right? The metropolitan areas where most of the activity is occurring. And I think it's also interesting that some of those that are bright early on go away and others become brighter as you go along.
Yeah, perfect. I mean, really what you're describing is what is called neuroplasticity. I mean, the plastic brain. So the idea here is that really our brain's job is to decide what to grow and what to let go of. So it's taking behaviors, thoughts, things that information that isn't helpful or useful to us, and it lets those die. It prunes those out, and then it focuses on what it needs to grow. And that's what you saw were the hubs, where it was bright and deep, and you could tell that there was a lot of traffic going down those. And so that's all about growing what is going to be most effective for us and serve us in the most efficient and effective way. So neuroplasticity is super cool because it allows us to structure our brain so it optimizes the achievement of goals. So it's why we can achieve goals in the first place. The problem that we have is that our brains have so much information coming at it at one time. I mean, per second, our unconscious brain is taking in 11 million pieces of information per second. So our conscious brains per second are taking in about 40 pieces of information, which means that in our short-term memory, within 15 to 30 seconds, anything that you're hearing right now, it will be gone within 15 to 30 seconds, because our short-term memory just doesn't hold on to that kind of stuff unless we tell our brains that this is important information and I need to do something with it. I'm going to put some energy towards this. So really the main and most important job our brain has is to body budget. It's constantly determining, is this worth the energy? Will the value be sufficient for the energy I'm going to put into this? And so the real point is if we have a goal, especially a long-term goal that's going to require a lot of energy, you've got to let your brain know that it's worth putting the energy into developing those thick neural pathways where they become fast and usable, efficient. So to make this as simple as possible, I'm pulling on two books. This actually comes, I'm pulling a metaphor that both of these books talk about. It was originally mentioned in Jonathan Haidt's book, and Chip and Dan Heath, their brothers, a lot about this very same metaphor. So it's super great if you're looking for a good read. Switch, How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Great book. I would highly recommend it. But the metaphor is this. It is a rider on an elephant down a pathway. Super simple. The rider is our rational. I've got him in a suit because he's our rational thinker. He's in the brain. There's really the neuroscience that's come out is really, it's a systems brain, right? So we've got the prefrontal cortex and the left hemisphere and the reticular activating system, and all these parts of our brain that work together that really develop as our writer, as our logical thinker. So he's got some great strengths. He's rational, he's a planner, he charts for the future, and he specifically loves and needs clarity. So there's some things that we can do to help the writer know that this goal is going to be worth our time and effort. So the first thing is to point to the destination, because he loves clarity. He's a focuser. He loves to weigh through the pros and cons. He loves the checklists and the spreadsheets, and because he loves all that data, he can get lost in the weeds. Too many options makes him go from structure to rigidity, and he gets stuck. So this pointing to the destination is so important for the writer to be able to see long term, what is it that I'm looking at? So it's got to be clear, crystal clear to see that outcome. What are any thoughts on that? I don't want to take this whole.
No, I think as you were talking about that, I thought we live in the information age, right? How much information is thrown at us regarding finances, right? On a pretty regular basis. And if we were to do Google searches for, any kind of financial information, there's just hundreds or thousands of, articles, and there's books, and there's all kinds of different things and opinions, just kind of unlimited, right? And on all the social media pages, et cetera. And so, I mean, that causes, I think, the writer in our minds to get stuck, right? To have analysis paralysis and have a hard time moving forward because there's conflicting opinions and conflicting advice, and it's just unclear, even though we have more information than ever.
Right. It's a great point. That's true. That's why, and for this first one, it's really about pointing to the long-term end goal that you're hoping for. So the more you can look at, if the writer can hear and see, what will I be doing? What will I be seeing? What will I be hearing? What will I be accomplishing? What will all of this include? You need to be asking those really clear questions. And what's interesting is research shows that looking at all the positives is great, but also looking at the negatives. If I don't do this, what will I be doing? What will I be thinking? What will I be hearing? What will I be seeing? What if I don't accomplish financial freedom? What will end up happening? Because that's almost, especially for a long-term goal, it's motivating to see what the negatives could be if I don't accomplish what that long-term positive goal could be for me. Okay, so anything before we head to the next one?
No, I think that's one of the major things that takes time, right? And this webinar, during this time that you're on this webinar, you're not going to get all of the answers that you need. This is something that you're going to need to come back to, and you'll have this recording, and hopefully you have some good notes, and put some effort into this, some energy into it, right? Our minds create the neural pathways that we tell it are important, right? And so if we're saying, hey, you know what, I want to come back to this and I want to answer that question, what am I setting out to achieve that is incredibly inspiring? What's going to, and you actually invest some time, then we're telling our brain this is important, and some more energy will be put towards it. And the more we do that, the more often we do that, the more that neural pathway gets created.
That's right. In fact, that's so good because, and we'll cover that just in a little bit more of that in a second too, because if the brain, the writer loves to think, and so he's not much of a doer. And so unless things are crystal clear and he revisits the pathway and actually takes action on it, he's never going to move out of the thinking mode. So he's got to be pushed a little bit into movement, and spending time on it is a way to tell the writer, hey, this is important enough. So that's great. So finding the bright spots, it's super interesting because like we were saying, the brain's job is to predict what the body's going to need, the costs that are associated with this goal. So when you're engaging a new goal, you think about, it's kind of hard for the writer to be able to predict. This is a new pathway he's never been down before. So if he can look at other areas, other contexts, other places where he has been successful, and then he can take those predictions, those experiences, and predict the future for this particular goal. So if he can take previously walked neurological roads, he can determine what will work. So even small and inconsistent successes towards other goals can help him start to determine, okay, I can take that and apply it to this to make it work. So when you think about bright spots, what do you think about for financial planning and how that fits in?
Well, I think it makes me think of the book, The Gap and the Gain by Benjamin Hardy. And he talks about when we recognize successes, they breed more successes. So, as we're going along and we achieve something, we're taking positive steps towards financial freedom, no matter how small. That was the key part that he talks about. No matter how small the gain, if we take time to recognize that gain, then it actually leads to more. And think of it, I think it's helpful to think of it in terms of momentum, right? So the more we're recognizing our bright spots or the positive movements that we make towards financial freedom, the more we're gaining that momentum, we're gaining speed. And I think it increases our chances of success.
Yeah. And that actually really fits right into this last part, to really direct our rider. Because the rider loves to just stay in spinning his wheels and thinking about stuff without some kind of action, then he just stays in the theorizing place. So sometimes it's the hardest thing is taking that first step. So scripting the critical moves is so critical. It's important to marry those long-term goals with short-term critical movements so that the writer knows what's next. If he doesn't have clarity on what the next critical step is, he won't move forward. And I know in your process, that's one of the things that is such a benefit to your process is that the planners work with the clients so that they know what the next critical step is, the next critical movement. And if the client isn't taking those steps and actually helping the writer move out of the theorizing position, then the why is just a theory. It never really solidifies and becomes more.
Right. Yeah, I think as we take clients through the planning process, especially in the initial phase of planning, there's a lot of pretty small steps that people can take. Like, for example, setting up an account to save systematically and automatically, getting an umbrella policy for additional liability protection, or even just getting a quote, or even gathering all their documents. Those are small scripted moves that help them gain momentum and start moving down the pathway and get off of just theorizing, right? And just get off of just thinking. It becomes doing at that point.
Right. And it's so important at that very end, it says to track them. It's important to set up those milestones and so that you're able to recognize that really creates that feedback loop for the writer to get that dopamine hit, and he knows that he's making progress. The writer can be really positive when he starts to see progress, and that's the bananas along the pathway for him. That's the motivation.
So that's part of it, right? Is as you're working towards financial freedom, setting milestones that are not so far in the distant future. It makes me think of Peloton. I ride Peloton, probably not as often as I should, but I just reached my 100th ride. And we've had the Peloton. Well, I probably shouldn't admit how long I've had it, but it hasn't been too long. But I reached my 100th ride. And it's interesting how Peloton does awards, and they must understand this neuroscience, right, behind it, because what they do after your first ride, you get an award. It says you achieved your first ride, right, and they give you a digital medal for it. And then after your 10th ride, then they give you another one. And after 25 rides, then they give you another one. And then 100, and it kind of spreads out. The longer you go, there's more distance between each milestone, which I think is very strategic on their part. And we could probably learn from that and apply that to our personal financial situation as well. What's the first milestone? What's the one that we're going to achieve and we're going to celebrate? And it might not be, and it shouldn't be very far in the future or very difficult to achieve. But as time goes on, we can grow our muscles, so to speak, and be able to last a little bit longer in between milestones, right? And hitting harder and harder ones as we go along.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the next part of the metaphor is the elephant. And, if you've ever had a willpower issue where the elephant is our heart. It's the emotion, it's the desire. It's actually the part of the brain where you've got your amygdala and your hippocampus and your right hemisphere. It's the more emotional set desire and drive part of you. So if you're experiencing a willpower issue, what's probably happening is that your rider and your elephant are not aligned. They're not on task. So I was thinking about this, and a couple days ago, I took my neighbor some pumpkin bars, and he's on a diet. So he came over and he was kind of cussing me out a little bit because he said, I had the pumpkin bars sitting on the counter, and I passed by them the first time and I didn't touch them. And I passed by them later on in the afternoon and I didn't touch them. But by that evening, when I passed by them, he said I had 3. And that's a classic example of the rider and the elephant, right? The rider is logical in saying, you eat celery when you want a snack. You don't have pumpkin bars. But the elephant eventually is going to win. He's bigger than the rider. So the rider thinks that he's got the control because he's got the reins, but eventually the elephant always wins out. And that's the key to know. So here's some things that you can do to motivate your elephant. You need to find the feeling. This is super exciting. This is some new neuroscience that has just recently come out. So this is kind of exciting information. When you find the feeling, emotion is actually, they're finding, is more of a prediction when you're having an emotion. And there's 3 parts to the to predicting that an emotion predicts it. So the 3 factors that feed into that are your context, your history, and your goal. So here's a couple of questions that might help you understand how to find the feeling of what's going on for the elephant. So the first one is a contextual question. What has brought me to wanting this goal? So I'll ask you, Kyle, what about this question would be useful information to help you understand where the elephant's at?
Yeah, I think that this is it could be like societal pressure, or it could be other things, right? Like I would think about how traditional planning really focuses on retirement. And a lot of times people are trying to achieve this goal of retirement because it was kind of put out there for them and it gets repeated enough. And they're like, well, I guess I should. So maybe they feel like it's just something that they should do as an adult. They should be responsible. They should be planning for the future, things like that, right? That could be an initial reason why you're even thinking about it in the first place, right? Beyond that, it could be, as you think through your own situation, it could be, hey, I want to be in a position to help people, or I had personal experiences growing up where my parents were really poor and struggled, and I saw them, lose their house, or I saw them lose their business, or I saw these things happen, right? Or on a positive side, I saw, people being able to have freedom with their time, so that could be, those are all kind of emotional connections to why I'm, why I have this want in my heart.
Yeah. So that actually feeds into the next question. I think the idea about the context too is really what brought me to this crossroads and needing to talk to someone, or feeling that desire to get here. And history definitely feeds into that. So we'll look into the history, but context, maybe I'm coming up on what I consider retirement age, or maybe I've just watched, like you're saying, my parents right now, they're in the process of needing financial support because they didn't save, or, what is it right now in this context of my life that's brought me to this crossroads? And then exactly what you're saying, what memories and experiences have I had with finances in the past? And that really is all about going back into, where have I had successes? Where have I had failures? What are some of the feelings I've had? If I grew up poor, how is that growing up poor affecting the way I think about saving money, or how easily it is for me to spend money? All of that feeds in, that context and history deeply affects the elephant, not the element, the elephant. And so visiting that, asking these questions and figuring out where is the elephant at on these feelings and thoughts. And then what predictions can I make based on my context and history? Understanding that context and history, and how am I predicting what's going to happen in the future because of them, and how I'll handle that.
That makes me think of the marshmallows experiment with the kids, right?
Yes.
It's kind of a pretty famous one, right? A lot of times. So the idea, and you can correct me, Amber, you're probably more familiar with it than I am, but they brought in these young kids. I don't remember how old they were. My guess is like 5 to 8 years old, somewhere in there. And they basically would place a marshmallow in front of them, and they would say, you can eat this now if you want, or if you wait, we'll give you 2,
Right.
and a lot of the kids ate them right away. Right. And if you found out about their history, they may have grown up in a place where food was more scarce, right? Or a family situation which was more poor. And so they kind of had that scarcity mindset of, well, I better eat while I have it. Right. Versus the kids who were willing to wait. And by the way, these trends continued on throughout
That's
their
right.
life in other aspects of their life. So the ones that had deferred gratification continued to have deferred gratification for the most part.
Into their SAT, there's GPAs, all kinds of
Yep.
really interesting places, right?
So
Yeah.
I think the prediction, right? What Amber's talking about is like, if I plan for the future, I may be sacrificing today entirely, right? That could be a scarcity mindset, right? That somebody has, and it could be based on their history, right? Like, if I grew up poor, then now that I'm making good money, I'm going to enjoy it. I'm going to use it now because I don't know if I'll have it in the future.
Right. And so then the next question really feeds into helping you decide how you want to motivate your elephant, because what emotions do I want to have around this goal? Understanding where you're at with the elephant, and then here's your transition point, your pivot point. What do I want to predict around this goal? And what memories and experiences do I have to support my desired emotion around this goal? Once again, just like with the rider, this is the bright spots for the elephant. It's helping the elephant remember, I've had these feelings before. I was able to save successfully in this context. And I remember that emotion. I remember that feeling, so it can build upon that. Next idea is to motivate your elephant, you got to shrink the change. So the elephant becomes super anxious and fearful when change is too big. It becomes overwhelmed. The elephant actually sees a lot. So because it can see so much at one time, it can become overwhelmed. So it's really important for the elephant to break the goal up into smaller pieces and then celebrate those wins along the way. The elephant's emotion. And so it's all about engineering those successes early. It's like you were talking about the Peloton. Boy, they've got it down to a science, literally. The elephant is going to be energized by the dopamine hits, which really is the brain's reward system. And as it feels those dopamine hits, its willingness to follow this pathway will increase. I mean, you think about it. If an elephant is going down the pathway, you're trying to establish this neural pathway for the first time, the elephant doesn't know that it's going to get fed on this pathway. It doesn't know what's up there. And so it's going to be really hesitant to go down this new neural pathway. So you want to have bananas early on along the way so that it can know that, hey, this is going to be an okay road to go down. I'm not going to starve along the way. This is going to be worth my body budget. The value is here. I can get something from this.
Yeah, I think that, as I recently read a book called Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, and he really talks about this as a part of your strategy, right? In setting up maybe positive habits, improving, adopting habits that you want, that you feel like will help you achieve your objectives, right? He says, look, you can't take this huge thing all at once. So you have to break it down into what are the smaller, in fact, he says, choose the easiest next thing you can do. Right. And if he kind of compared it to, or he talked about one of the habits he wanted to start, which was doing push-ups. And so he decided, well, I'm going to do a push-up a day, and I'm just going to start to create a habit. And every time, in fact, he tied it to going to the restroom. So every time he went to the restroom, he would do a push-up. And inevitably, what he found was that he was able to do more and more push-ups, and he was able to make it consistent. But he shrunk the change. He didn't say, well, I'm going to start by doing 100 push-ups a day, right? Which was this huge test. I'm going to go from 0 to 100 push-ups. I think the same is true in finances, right? If we look at our financial situation, I think most of us could probably find some simple thing that's like the easiest positive change we can make and take that one step, right? And what that does is it helps create momentum for us. It helps us create, we get a success early on, just like Peloton does, right? And rewards you for that first ride or the 10th ride, right? Which is really, in the whole scheme of things, no big deal. Nobody's going to become suddenly super fit by riding 10, spin rides. So, but they understand the creating the pathway.
Yeah. Yeah, which we're going to talk about next. So that's great. And I do want to mention here with engineering the early successes, our brains are really quickly, they're made to see problems. They're made to recognize danger. And so sometimes they say that a problem, the brain, it's like Velcro, but successes are like Teflon. It just slides right off the brain. So making time to truly celebrate and engineer those successes early, and then taking the time to celebrate them and let the brain know that this is something to celebrate makes a big difference. Sometimes the elephant really needs to pause for a minute and really enjoy those bananas to recognize those successes along the way. Yeah.
Right. In BJ Fogg's book, again, Tiny Habits, he talks about, like literally, physically, vocally cheering, right? When you accomplish even that small thing, like, yes, and what that does to our brain is huge over time. So yeah, taking that time to celebrate even the tiniest of success is really important. Yep.
Okay, so this last one for the motivate your elephant, I love this one. It's grow your people. So the elephant's superpower is that because it sees like the depth, it's great at empathy. It can put itself in other people's places, and it's values driven. So the values are super important to the elephant. So this is really important for you as you're trying to set up a long-term goal, is to look at what are the values that are at play here. So for example, maybe my value is family. And so I really want to spend money to make memories with my family, because that is a value that I absolutely hold. I also have a value that I don't want to be a burden on my children when I'm old. So that is a value that I hold. So for the elephant to move forward, those have got to be aligned. So how do you align those values? You got to figure out what values are at play and where they're misaligned so that you can line them up again.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think, that's one of the downsides, or one of the negatives to traditional financial planning, because we're just being told we should save to save, and the assumption is because we want to quit our job at some point in time, right? And what if that's not really a value, right? What if that's not super important to us? What if we actually love what we do? Is quitting really going to be the motivator? So aligning the values with our actions, I think, are super important.
And one of the things that I want to stress here, and then we'll go to the next one, but when you're aligning those values, what's really valuable is that oftentimes it doesn't have to be an either or. It doesn't have to be, I will choose this value over that value. But aligning them is, how can I do this and then the elephant's satisfied. So yeah, figuring out how to keep your values and just line them up, get them aligned. So create the expectation. This is an interesting one. Create the expectation of failure. So you don't want to create the expectation of failure in the goal at the end, but really along the pathway. Let the elephant know that there will be some mistakes and failures along the way. The brain actually learns the very best after a mistake. Mistakes literally prime the brain to learn. So allowing your elephant to know, hey, there's going to be some mistakes along the way. don't take this personally. It's not an actual comment on you as a person. It's a comment on what am I learning? How am I going to grow? Where do I need to adjust? And where are we moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me think of Elon Musk, right? And he's shooting these rockets up into space, right? And some of them don't even make it very far off the pad, or don't even make it off the pad, and they blow up. And I think in a lot of people's minds, they're like, "Well, he failed, right? He just lost a bunch of money." But that's not how Elon Musk looks at it. He looks at it as, wow, we're going to learn so much from this, and that's going to make us so much better going forward. Um, as I read books from highly successful people, Henry Ford and John Huntsman and Warren Buffett, all these people, they all talk about how even if their wealth was taken away right now, if they lost all of it, they could rebuild it, and they could rebuild it faster than they did the first time. And the reason is because they learned from their failures along the way. They didn't avoid failures. They weren't trying for perfection. They were trying to learn all they could as they went along. And most of that learning occurred as they had failures along the way.
Yeah. Okay, so shaping the path. So here's the path is all about your external environmental situational circumstances. So here's the problem with the path. If the writer isn't clear about the next steps, and if the elephant isn't motivated, then they fall off the path, because it's so much easier for them to slip back into old neural pathways where they know where the bananas are, where they know where they're going to get fed, they know what to expect. So here you're asking them to go down an unknown path, and to kind of trust the next steps, and that the motivation is going to be there, that the bananas will be along the pathway. So the easier and more motivating you can make the path, the better and more likely the elephant and the rider will be to stay on it. So the first thing you can do is to really tweak your environment. So the environmental cues, how you set up triggers, will either hinder or support your goal for achievement. And I thought about you on this one, because so Kyle's is working on wanting to lose a little bit of weight. And so he took our cookie jar and he took it over to my parents' house and he filled it up with cookies, which was brilliant, because then if he wants a cookie, he's got to get his shoes on, he's got to walk down the street, he's got to go visit his in-laws, and then he can have a cookie. So it's perfect, right? Because he set up that path so that it was much harder for the elephant and the rider to go down. And the opposite is true. If you want to make the pathway something that they will go down, you've got to make that as easy as possible. So by providing like a trigger, okay, this is when I'm going to do this. It helps the rider know, okay, I'm triggered. I know that this is my next step, what I need to do. You can habit stack. You can reduce distractions. The whole point is, how am I going to tweak my environment to make it as smooth and rewarding as possible?
Yeah. And as we go through the planning process with clients, there's a lot of things that we do to encourage tweaking the environment. For example, when you are saving money, or when you get paid, most people are paid by direct deposit. And so that's part of their environment, right? They're getting paid every time they get paid, it's direct deposited in their bank account. One tweak that we encourage clients to make is to have a portion of that paycheck go into their savings account. It makes it easy. It makes it happen automatically. They don't have to think about it. It's just something it's like if I were to keep that cookie jar here at our house, I would be automatically down there eating cookies all the time. So, you can think of, as you look at your financial situation, what are environmental tweaks you can make that will make doing the things you really want to achieve easier, and doing the things you're trying to, that are hindrances to you, and maybe self-sabotaging as far as your long-term objectives go, you can make those harder to do and tweak the environment so that that's the case.
Yeah, excellent. That's right. And that really feeds into this next one, which the brain really is looking for efficiency, right? It's that body budgeter again. So the more it can take something and turn it into a repetitive, automatic response where you're no longer having to focus on it, but it just plain happens. It allows for more bandwidth for the brain so that it has more resources when the next problem or situation comes up. So it's constantly looking for ways to build habits. It loves habits. So make it efficient. Use that neuroplasticity and form habits as much as possible. In the book, it recommends a checklist. The reason why is because for the writer, it's very clear to know what the next steps are. For the elephant, is getting the bananas, because every time you check it off, it feels good. It feels great to know that you're moving along the pathway and seeing progress for the elephant. So that's a very easy tool that you can use to help set up a clear habit. The whole idea is, what habits can I develop to help me accomplish these long-term goals? So however you choose to do it, the more habits you can establish, the better.
Right. As we talk about the checklist, one of the things that is a checklist, so to speak, would be the principles that we teach, right? So as those become just the way you think, right, they become a part of the lens through which you look at your finances. It just makes your choices quicker, makes them easier. It makes it easier to say no to certain things and say yes to other things, right? As you have these additional principles that serve you in creating that checklist.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the final one with shaping the path is rallying the herd. So here's the key question: who do you need to have on your team to support your goal? We are social creatures. And if we can have, so especially if there's like a partnership, a husband, wife, or partners that are in this, going through this entire, the elephant, the rider, the pathway together, and kind of visiting, where's your elephant? Where's your rider? What are your thoughts? Where are your emotions? Where are you at? What's your history? What are your values that are driving you? And can we align together so that we're supporting each other to accomplish this goal? And then how can we shape the path so that we're helping each other? We're making this easier for each other.
Yeah. If you've heard of the book The Millionaire Next Door by Thomas Stanley, he did a 25-year research study on millionaires in America. And in the book The Millionaire Next Door, he just kind of summarizes his findings, right? And one of the findings that he discovered was, in most cases, millionaires had a spouse, right? And that spouse had certain, it was generally frugal, things like that. There was a support structure, is really what I took from it. And if I look at my own life, my own success in my business, I think of how vital it's been to have Amber be so supportive of me, especially during times that were difficult, were challenging. And I had somebody who believed in me. If you read or hear from people who are highly successful in almost any industry, who do they surround themselves with? They surround themselves with people who are supporting them, who believe in them, right? And have their goals in their minds as well, have that person's goals in their minds, and they're supporting them. And I think that's absolutely essential. If the people around you are working against you, I've also seen that. And there's a reason that money issues are one of the top reasons for people to get divorced, right? Is that they have differences in that, or they have, it's just negative in between them regarding that topic or others, right? So it's being on the same page. And that's one of the things that we hear all the time with people that go through our principles-based planning process, is how valuable it is for them to feel like, hey, now we're on the same page for the first time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so to end, here's some really interesting things to think about. What might look like resistance may actually be a lack of clarity. So in that case, you need to direct your writer, figure out what the next steps are. Where is he getting confused at, so he's not willing to move forward? Really clarify and direct the writer. What looks like laziness could be exhaustion. So it's your writer and your elephant are pushing against each other, and so you're not being able to move forward. So where's the elephant getting caught on? What's going on with the elephant? What are the values that you need to explore? What are the history or the emotions that are getting in the way that might not be in alignment with what your logical writer's thinking? And then what looks like a people problem, like, oh, I suck, I just don't have the power, I just am not smart enough, I just don't have the willpower to do this, could very well be a situation problem. Are you making, even if your writer and your elephant are aligned, if the pathway isn't easy enough and isn't getting enough bananas along the way, then you could be having that problem. So shape your path, make sure your environment is as functional and efficient as possible. And I do have to say that I love this metaphor. I do use it oftentimes in my life if I'm working on something and I just seem to keep running into an obstacle. I just, for some reason, can't move forward with my goal. I do oftentimes think, what does my writer need? Am I clear enough on the next steps? Do I know what my long-term vision is? What does my elephant need? Emotionally, am I on board? Where am I at emotionally? How can I change things? Where do I want to be emotionally? And what are the steps I need to get there? And then is my pathway easy enough? And what can I clear away and simplify to make this work for me? That's it.
Okay. I love it, Amber. I think it's such a good analogy, metaphor, good way for us to figure out what questions we should really be asking, as we're going forward and as we struggle, especially if we're finding ourselves kind of false starting over and over again in our objectives in the financial realm or in other areas of our life. I think this is super helpful. So thank you so much for sharing those insights. I think that's awesome. I wanted to bring in a few more questions, and the purpose of me bringing in these additional questions is really just for you to take them from this meeting and keep thinking about them and really invest some time and effort into it. I think, as we go through the questions, you may think, hey, this is a writer issue, or this is an elephant issue, or this is a path issue. And I think as you work through that, it's going to help you get greater clarity, increase your motivation, all of those things. So the first question that I want you to think about and take more time on is, once I become financially free, what will I do differently? What am I going to do different than I would do right now? What would that be specifically? Another question is, what will I do more of? What would I like to spend more time doing or money doing or whatever, right? What will I do more of? What will I do less of? What am I going to spend less time doing? The next one is, how will being financially free affect my health, right? Maybe it's emotional, maybe it's physical, those kinds of things. Maybe it's intellectual, right? How will being financially free affect those areas of my life? And really start to write down clear answers to these, right? And reserve the right to change any of them at any point in time. You could change what those answers are. I'm sure that they'll evolve over time. How will being financially free affect my relationships? Right now, maybe you could say, well, how is not being financially free affecting my relationship? Maybe that's easier to see. And that could be valuable as well. So, and then becoming financially free, how will that change? What will I do to strengthen important relationships? If I'm financially free, what opportunities do I have to strengthen important relationships that I have or that I would like to forge? who else will benefit from me becoming financially free? So who are the people, Amber talked about motivating the herd, getting the herd on board. If other people will benefit from you becoming financially free, maybe they should be part of the conversation, right? And they're cheering you on, right? And celebrating your successes along the way. How will they benefit? And then what will happen if I don't become financially free? I think we're motivated by positive reinforcers and negative reinforcers in many things in our lives. And so what are the things that will happen? I think maybe this last question is easier for most of us to answer than any of these others, right? What happens if I don't become financially free? What will I become more dependent on? How will that affect my stress or my health, my relationships, if I don't become financially free? So I'd love it if you would take these questions home, spend more time on them. I think that'll help as far as, getting clarity for the writer, have an emotional tie, right? That the elephant needs. And then, figuring out what's that pathway. How do I make the pathway more clear? How do I shrink the objective as I go along? Okay, well, we're gonna go into the Q&A for the last little bit. If there are any, Monica, were there any questions?
There are no questions in the chat box right now.
Okay. All right. Well, some people submitted some information or things that they wanted to address, or most people answered what has been a significant obstacle in you achieving or maintaining financial freedom. So I want to walk through some of these, and maybe Amber, if you would kind of talk about the elephant, the rider, and the pathway as it relates to some of these. So one of the consistent ones was discipline and consistency. That's what they're saying has been a significant obstacle in achieving financial freedom.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks right to our elephant, right? It's that discipline and consistency. It's the writer is saying it makes logical sense that I need to do this, but our elephant is pushing against it and saying, yeah, but it's a whole lot easier to go down a path that I've already done.
Right. Yep. Awesome. So how can they use the rider, the pathway? How can they use that to maybe figure out what's going on?
I think honestly with each of these, that it comes down to questioning what does my writer need? And is my writer fully aware of what he needs to do next or she needs to do next? What are my next clear cut steps? Go to the elephant. Where's my elephant at? How on board is my elephant? What are the values that might be conflicting? Where do I need to shrink it so that the elephant isn't as fearful? That whole list of questions that I brought up at the beginning, where you're looking at the context, the history, and the goal. How are they aligning, and how's my past feeding into my prediction of what my future is and why I'm struggling? So yeah, it's just digging down deep into all the things we just talked about, figuring out where the obstacle is, and then being able to address it. And the benefit of these people is that they've got planners, your principle-based planners, and that's a perfect person to discuss this with. If they're running into obstacles, here's where I feel my obstacles at. How am I going to overcome this?
Yeah, when I think about discipline and consistency, I think probably it's a battle between the rider and the elephant, right? It's the willpower. As we've talked about time and time again with the pumpkin bars and the cookie jar and other things, willpower only lasts for so long, right? And the elephant eventually is stronger, and the elephant wins eventually. And so to me, discipline probably has a lot to do with habits and habit formation. What habits do I currently have that are impeding me or preventing me from accomplishing what I want? What new habits do I want to adopt in order to, solve this issue? I don't necessarily think it's a discipline issue as much as it is probably a habit issue.
Yeah. Like ease that pathway, figure out what can I habit stack on that I'm already doing. Yeah, you've got to, adjust the external pathway so that it makes it easier for the elephant and the rider to actually go down. Because
Yeah.
even if the elephant and the rider are aligned, if the pathway is too difficult, they're going to give up and go to a pathway that they already know.
Yep. I think it's valuable to read books like Atomic Habit and by James Clear and Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. If you feel like you're having discipline or consistency issues, I would go to those books because I think that they give you some very clear steps you can take in order to create the habits that are going to lead to the kind of success that you want. And so I think that's a good point. A few people said grandchildren are their obstacle, their significant obstacle.
Right, which speaks to a values issue. We kind of talked about that again. That's an elephant issue. What are my values, and how can I align them so that I'm meeting my needs of wanting to be a great, wonderful grandma or grandpa, and still meet my financial freedom? How do I align those values?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think traditional planning says you should save for the future, which for young people that are just entering their profession or workforce or whatever, right? That could be 3-4 decades down the road. And you talked about having bananas along the way to motivate the elephant and the rider, right? You have to have something that says, okay, this is success. I think traditional planning has thought that just sending an online statement every quarter was sufficient. Just let them know what their value is, how it's changed. Unfortunately, a lot of times it goes up, it goes down, right? So it might be a give bananas one time, and then it might be taking away bananas the next. Our planning is a little bit different because we're encouraging people to save in places where they have access and use of their money. So number one, it's right there. They have access to it. They can use it for whatever they want. Additionally, we're encouraging people to invest into real assets that provide income, not 4 years down or 4 decades down the road or 3 decades down the road. It's now, right? Investing in things that produce income now, which could provide additional money to spoil grandchildren, right? Or it could provide, and in addition to that, it could give them even more money to save, right? So they could actually save more, invest more, and do more with their grandchildren as a result of a different type of planning. So I think you're right. Sometimes it's aligning those things so that they're not working against each other, but working together, right? How can I do this versus why it can't work, right? Mm-hmm. Motivation. Somebody mentioned motivation. It sounds like sometimes they're motivated, sometimes they're not. Do you want to talk about the endurance of motivation?
It's like we were saying, it could be really any. Motivation is an elephant thing again. You kind of hear that same. If it's the rider is all about what are my next steps? I don't know where to move to next. That's a rider issue. Motivation is an elephant issue. So going back in, maybe look through some of those questions that we listed. Why is this not motivating for me? And if I really want it to be motivating for me, where do I need to dig down into? What is out of alignment? What do I need to figure out in order to make this? And find those bright spots. When has this been a motivation to me, and how can I build on that?
Awesome. I love that. Probably the most common obstacle people brought up was lack of time or being too busy. Time management. Those are all similar response, right? So what would you say about time, lack of time?
It's probably a little bit of each of them, but I would really lean on shape the path. If it's a time thing, then figuring out what you need to cut out in your life and simplify, make it more habitual. What can I do to make my path a lot easier? Because my path is pretty rocky right now.
Yeah, so systems. Yeah, I think it's a systems issue. It's habits, right? And I always think about really good, athletes, right? A really great basketball player. He doesn't think at all when he goes up to the free throw line to shoot a free throw. He's not thinking about the mechanics of shooting a free throw, keeping your elbow in and bending your knees and one foot slightly in front of the other. That's not going through his head. He's done it so many times. His neural pathway is so fine-tuned. It's bright, right? That initial image that you showed us, it's a super bright line. It's very thick. They're not thinking about that. So what that frees their mind up to do is to think, what am I going to do after I shoot this free throw?
That's right. It opens up the bandwidth. That's
Yep.
right.
Yep. And I think, we all have 24 hours in a day. None of us gets more. None of us gets less in the day. And so it's, how can I make it more efficient? How can I make things that are currently taking a lot of my mind thought that I don't really want to put in that direction? How can I make them habits, or how can I systematize those? And there are probably a ton of things. I always find it interesting. We live in the technology age, right? And all of this technology has been designed to do what for us? Free up our time, right? Like we have clothes washers and dishwashers, and we have, all kinds of different things that make those projects that used to take all day, right, take hardly any time or no time at all on our part, right? And yet we're so busy. We're busier than ever before. But there's the positive of that is that we can accomplish more than ever before, right, in one day.
Well, and I'd like to add on to that. I saw Amber Stitt come on here. Right, multitasking, like making the most of your time, being truly present when you're working on a task and really accomplishing that, so that you're freeing up your mind to work on task by task, so that you're not actually jumbling and extending out the amount of time it takes you to accomplish one thing because you're trying to do too many things at once. So yeah, really utilizing your time effectively would be a big part of this, which goes back to like getting rid of the distractions and really being able to focus at the task at hand.
Okay. Is there any others, people who are on the call? Do you have any questions or things you would like to add before we hang up today? If you do, please type in the chat box or use the hand raise button, and we can unmute you and let you talk and ask your question.
And I have to clarify, I didn't say Amber Stitt because she needs she multitasks. She asked me to do a presentation for her, so about multitasking. So that's why I mentioned her.
All right, Jake, we're going to be talking about what investing in yourself really looks like. And we're going to be inviting a few of our very successful clients that I think really epitomize this idea of investing in yourself. And so we're going to let them share their stories, answer questions. It should be a really great opportunity for everybody who attends the webinar. So I encourage you all, and encourage you to also invite other people. That's the best way to grow this audience and this philosophy that we teach. And anyway, thank you so much. We hope that you found this time valuable in this presentation, and you'll get a recording of it as well, so you can watch it again sometime if you need to revisit some of it. So thank you so much.